The faithful guardian, the scent of fear, has a distinct signature, sharp, metallic, and impossible to mask. Ranger knew this scent intimately. It saturated the courtroom, seeping from the pores of every human present, including his handler. But there was something else, something more alarming than mere anxiety. An unfamiliar odor, clinical and threatening, wafted through the air vents. It didn't belong here. It was wrong. The German shepherd's muscles tensed beneath his sleek coat as his ears swiveled toward the back entrance. No one else noticed. Humans rarely did. Their senses were dull, their instincts dormant. But Ranger had been trained to detect what others couldn't, to sense danger before it manifested. And right now, every fiber of his being screamed that something was very wrong. Marcus Bennett felt the change in his companion before he saw it, a subtle shift in Ranger's posture, a new tension in the leash. He glanced down at the dog who had saved his life more times than he could count, both on the battlefield and at home in the darkest hours of night when memories became monsters. Something was happening. Something only Ranger could sense. Something only Ranger could sense. And in that moment, as Judge Harlow prepared to decide their fate, neither man nor dog realized that the real battle was just beginning. Setting and characters: the Washington, D.C. courtroom felt suffocating despite its high ceilings and ornate architecture. Dark mahogany panels lined the walls, absorbing what little natural light filtered through the tall windows. The room carried the weight of countless verdicts, the air thick with the residue of justice and injustice alike. Master Sergeant Marcus Bennett sat rigidly in his wheelchair, his military uniform immaculate, medals glinting under the fluorescent lights. At 34, his face carried the weathered lines of someone who had seen too much, yet his eyes remained sharp, alert. The wheelchair was still new to him, just 7 months since the explosion that had taken both his legs above the knee. His hands, calloused and strong, rested on the wheels, ready to move at a moment's notice. Old habits died hard. A soldier never lost his vigilance. Beside him sat Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat of rich black and tan. His posture mirrored his handler's, straight-backed, attentive, ready. Unlike many military working dogs, Ranger didn't project aggression. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that commanded respect. The specialized vest he wore marked him as more than just a military asset. It identified him as a working dog, though the full extent of his training remained classified. The bond between man and dog was palpable, evident in the way Ranger constantly monitored Marcus with subtle glances, how his body angled protectively toward his handler. They breathed in sync, moved in tandem, two parts of a single unit forged in the crucible of war. Across the courtroom sat Major Eliza Winters, the military prosecutor. Her slender frame belied her tenacity, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. She represented the United States Army's position that Ranger was government property, a highly trained asset needed for another deployment. Her arguments had been clinical, pragmatic, devoid of sentiment. The military has invested over $150,000 in training Canine Ranger, she had stated earlier, her voice cool and measured. His skills are needed for an upcoming operation. While we sympathize with Sergeant Bennett's attachment, sentimentality cannot override national security priorities. Judge Raymond Harlow presided from his elevated bench, his silver hair and lined face giving him the appearance of a weathered eagle. Known for his strict adherence to protocol, he had maintained a neutral expression throughout the proceedings, offering no hint of which way he might rule. The courtroom was filled to capacity, other veterans showing solidarity, journalists covering the human interest angle, military officials observing the proceedings. The case had gained national attention, sparking debate about the classification of military working dogs and the rights of their handlers. Marcus's attorney, Diane Chen, had made an impassioned case, presenting evidence of Ranger's critical role in Marcus's ongoing recovery from PTSD and physical trauma. She had brought in experts to testify about the unique bond formed between handlers and their dogs, how that connection couldn't be severed without psychological consequences. As the proceedings neared their conclusion, the tension in the room was palpable. For Marcus, everything hung in the balance. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was family, the one constant in a world that had been shattered by war and reshaped by trauma. The thought of losing him now, after everything they'd survived together, was unbearable. The apartment they shared in Alexandria was modest, a ground-floor unit with wheelchair accessibility and a small fenced yard where Ranger could stretch his legs. Their life together had developed a comfortable rhythm. Morning exercises, where Ranger helped Marcus with his physical therapy. Afternoon walks in the nearby park. Evenings spent with Marcus reading military history while Ranger lay at his feet. They visited the VA hospital twice weekly, where Ranger's presence helped not just Marcus but other veterans struggling with their own invisible wounds. But beneath this routine lay a deeper truth. Ranger was Marcus's lifeline. On the nights when the nightmares came, when the faces of fallen comrades and the sounds of battle became too real, it was Ranger who woke him. Ranger who grounded him back to reality. Ranger whose solid presence reminded him he wasn't alone and he wasn't alone. Darkness. Now, as Judge Harlow shuffled his papers, preparing to deliver his ruling, Marcus felt that lifeline beginning to fray. "Conflict problem before I deliver my ruling," Judge Harlow began, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. "I want to give Sergeant Bennett one final opportunity to address the court." Marcus straightened in his wheelchair, his grip tightening on Ranger's leash. The dog pressed closer to his side, a warm, solid presence that steadied his nerves. Taking a deep breath, Marcus spoke, his voice carrying the weight of emotion he'd been fighting to contain. "Your Honor," he began, his tone raw yet controlled. "The military documents refer to Ranger as equipment, Asset 97142. But that's not who he is." Marcus paused, swallowing hard. "In Afghanistan, Ranger didn't just detect IDs or flush out insurgents. He pulled me from burning wreckage when our convoy was hit. He shielded me with his own body during firefights. He alerted us to ambushes before we entered kill zones." Marcus's voice grew stronger as he continued, his words directed not just at the judge, but at everyone present. "But it's what happened after that matters even more. When I came home, when I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror, when the nightmares were so bad, I was afraid to sleep. Ranger was there. He is the reason I'm still here, still fighting." The courtroom remained utterly still, the air thick with unspoken emotion. Some spectators dabbed at their eyes, while others exchanged knowing glances. Even Major Winters looked down at her notes, momentarily avoiding the raw humanity on display. "The Army says they need him for another mission," Marcus continued. "But my mission with Ranger is incomplete. We're still in the field together, just fighting different battles now. Please," his voice cracked slightly, "don't take him from me." Judge Harlow's expression remained inscrutable as he nodded once, acknowledging Marcus's words. He glanced down at the documents before him, then back up, preparing to speak. But before the words could leave his mouth, something unexpected happened. Ranger suddenly stood, his posture alert, ears forward and head turned toward the back entrance of the courtroom. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not aggressive, but a clear warning. "Ranger, quiet," Marcus commanded instinctively, though his own senses had immediately heightened in response to the dog's behavior. He knew this reaction. He'd seen it countless times in the field. Ranger wasn't being disobedient or anxious. He was alerting. The dog's growl deepened, his body tense and focused. Judge Harlow frowned, looking from the dog to Marcus. "Sergeant Bennett, please control Your Honor," Marcus interrupted, his voice low and urgent. "Something's wrong. Ranger doesn't behave this way unless there's danger. He is trained to detect threats, explosives, weapons, hostile intent." The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder. One of the bailiffs, Officer Reeves, a broad-shouldered man with a military bearing, moved closer to the judge's bench, his hand instinctively moving toward his weapon. "What kind of danger?" Judge Harlow asked, his skepticism evident but tempered by the growing unease in the room. Before Marcus could answer, Ranger barked sharply, a sound that echoed through the courtroom like a warning shot. He pulled against the leash, his focus locked on the heavy wooden doors at the rear of the courtroom. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, adrenaline flooding his system, a familiar sensation from his combat days. He wheeled himself forward slightly, his eyes now also fixed on the doors. The rest of the courtroom seemed to freeze, caught between disbelief and growing alarm. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension coursing through him, "I believe we should evacuate the room. Now." Officer Reeves exchanged a glance with his partner, Officer Daniels, a leaner man who now moved toward the back doors, his hand resting on his holster. The tension in the room had become almost suffocating, the earlier debate about Ranger's custody suddenly insignificant in the face of this new, unknown threat. As Officer Daniels approached the doors, Ranger's barking intensified, his body straining against the leash. Marcus held tight, his knuckles white with effort. He knew better than to doubt Ranger's instincts. Whatever was on the other side of those doors, it wasn't good. Officer Daniels reached for the door handle, his movements cautious. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. As the door began to open, Ranger's barks turned to snarls, deep and guttural. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. In all their time together, he'd rarely heard Ranger make that sound. The door swung open to reveal a dimly lit corridor. At first glance, it appeared empty, but Ranger's behavior only intensified. Officer Daniels drew his weapon, peering into the hallway. "I don't see anything," he called back, his voice tense with uncertainty. But Marcus knew better. Ranger was never wrong. His warning had saved dozens of lives in Afghanistan. If he sensed danger now, it was real, whether visible or not. And then they all heard it, a soft metallic click echoing from the shadows of the corridor. A sound so slight it might have gone unnoticed if not for the heavy silence that had fallen over the courtroom. But to Marcus, it was unmistakable. The sound of a weapon being readied. Journey development. The metallic click reverberated through the silence, sending a wave of tension through the courtroom. Officer Daniels froze, his weapon raised, peering into the shadowy corridor. Officer Reeves moved quickly to position himself between the door and Judge Harlow, his own weapon now drawn. "Everyone stay calm," Judge Harlow ordered, though his voice betrayed his own unease. "Officer Reeves, what exactly are we dealing with?" Before Reeves could respond, a voice called out from the dimly lit hallway, smooth, controlled, and unsettlingly confident. "There's no need for weapons," the voice announced. "I'm simply here to observe the proceedings." A figure emerged slowly from the shadows, a man of average height with a bearing that suggested military training. He wore a charcoal gray suit that seemed too perfectly tailored, his face composed in a mask of polite interest. But his eyes, cold and calculating, scanned the room with predatory efficiency. Ranger's growls intensified, his teeth now bared as he strained against the leash. Marcus had never seen the dog react so strongly to anyone. "Sir!" "Stop where you are," Officer Daniels commanded, his weapon still trained on the stranger. The man paused, raising his hands slightly in a gesture of compliance that somehow managed to seem mocking. "My name is Vincent Mercer," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly across the now silent courtroom. "I represent certain interests that have a stake in today's proceedings." Judge Harlow's expression hardened. "This is a closed hearing, Mr. Mercer. You'll need to leave immediately." Mercer smiled, a thin, empty gesture that never reached his eyes. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Your Honor. Not when something so valuable is being decided." His gaze shifted to Ranger, lingering with an intensity that made Marcus instinctively tighten his grip on the leash. "That dog," Mercer continued, taking another step forward despite Officer Daniels' warning, "is quite extraordinary, isn't he? More than just a military asset. More than just a service animal." His head tilted slightly as he studied Ranger. "He senses things others can't, knows things before they happen. That makes him special." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. How could this stranger know about Ranger's unique abilities? The full extent of Ranger's capabilities had been classified, known only to those in his specialized unit and certain military officials. Ranger's growls deepened, his body coiled with tension. Marcus placed a steadying hand on the dog's back, feeling the vibration of the growl beneath his palm. "I don't know who you are," Marcus said, his voice low and controlled, "but you're not welcome here, and you know nothing about my dog." Mercer's smile widened fractionally. "But I do know Sergeant Bennett. I know exactly what Ranger can do. That's why I'm here." He took another deliberate step forward. "The military thinks they own him. You think he belongs with you. But Ranger belongs to something much bigger than all of this." As he spoke, the lights in the courtroom flickered momentarily, casting strange shadows across the walls. When they stabilized, two more figures had appeared behind Mercer. A woman with sharp features and close-cropped platinum hair, and a larger man whose muscular frame strained against his dark suit. Neither spoke, but their presence amplified the sense of threat. Judge Harlow rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "This is an outrage. Officers, remove these people immediately." Officers Reeves and Daniels moved forward, but Mercer raised a hand, revealing a small device clutched in his palm. "I wouldn't," he said softly. "Not unless you want to see how quickly I can lock down this building." The courtroom erupted into murmurs and gasps. Major Winters stood, her hand moving toward her phone, but the platinum-haired woman stepped forward, shaking her head in silent warning. "What is this?" Marcus demanded, wheeling himself forward slightly, positioning himself more directly between Ranger and the intruders. "What do you want?" "It's quite simple," Mercer replied, his voice almost conversational, despite the tension crackling through the room. "We want Ranger, and we're prepared to be quite generous in our acquisition." Marcus felt a surge of protective rage. "He's not for sale. He's not property to be acquired." "Everything has a price, Sergeant," Mercer countered smoothly. "Name yours? Money? Medical treatments? The military is offering you nothing but a cold goodbye. We're offering you a future." For a brief moment, the courtroom seemed to recede, and Marcus was transported back to Afghanistan, to a moonless night in the Helmand province, when Ranger had suddenly stopped, refusing to move forward, despite commands. The rest of the unit had halted, trusting the dog's instincts. Minutes later, they watched as a Taliban patrol passed through the exact path they would have taken. Ranger had sensed them from over a kilometer away, in complete darkness, with no visual or auditory cues. It wasn't the first time the dog had displayed such uncanny awareness, such impossible awareness. Later, when Marcus had reported Ranger's unusual abilities, the dog had been temporarily reassigned for additional testing. When he returned 3 weeks later, Ranger was different, more focused, more attuned, but also sometimes distant, as if listening to frequencies beyond human perception. Marcus had never received a full explanation of what had been done, and his requests for information had been denied. Now, looking at Mercer's knowing smile, pieces began to fall into place. Whatever had been done to Ranger, whatever made him special beyond his training, had attracted dangerous attention. "Ranger stays with me," Marcus stated firmly, breaking free from his memory. "I don't care what you're offering or who you represent." Mercer's expression hardened, the pretense of civility fading. "You misunderstand, Sergeant Bennett. This isn't a negotiation. The dog comes with us, either voluntarily or not." As if on cue, the lights flickered again, and this time they went out completely. The courtroom was plunged in darkness, save for the emergency lights that cast an eerie red glow across the chaotic scene. People shouted in confusion. Chairs scraped against the floor as spectators rose in alarm. In the midst of the chaos, Marcus felt a sharp tug as Ranger suddenly lunged forward, his leash slipping from Marcus's grasp. Panic surged through him as he called out, "Ranger, come!" But for the first time since they'd been paired, Ranger didn't obey. Instead, Marcus heard the distinctive sounds of a struggle, followed by a yelp of pain that wasn't from Ranger. When the main lights flickered back on seconds later, one of Mercer's associates, the larger man, was on the ground, clutching his arm while Ranger stood over him, teeth bared but not attacking further. Mercer hadn't moved, his expression now one of genuine interest as he observed the dog. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Complete situational awareness even in darkness. Tactical decision-making." He disabled rather than killed. He glanced at Marcus. "Do you even understand what you have, Sergeant?" Before Marcus could respond, the courtroom doors burst open again as security reinforcements arrived, weapons drawn. Mercer's eyes narrowed slightly, a quick calculation visible in his expression. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Marcus. "We'll be watching, both of you." With a subtle gesture to his associates, he began backing toward a side exit, the platinum-haired woman helping her injured colleague. As they retreated, Ranger returned to Marcus's side, pressing against the wheelchair with a solidity that grounded him amid the chaos. Marcus wrapped his arm around the dog, feeling the rapid beat of Ranger's heart against his own racing pulse. The immediate danger had passed, but Marcus knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. Whatever Ranger was, whatever he could do, had made him a target, and keeping him safe had just become more complicated than a courtroom battle over custody. As security officers secured the room and medical personnel checked for injuries, Judge Harlow approached Marcus, his earlier composure shaken but his eyes resolute. "I believe," he said quietly, "we need to reconsider this case in light of new information." He glanced down at Ranger, who had now settled into a vigilant sitting position beside Marcus's wheelchair. "It seems there's much more at stake than I initially understood." Marcus nodded, his hand never leaving Ranger's back. "Yes, Your Honor, there always was." Climax 3 days after the courtroom incident, Marcus sat in his apartment, the blinds drawn and Ranger stationed vigilantly by the window. The dog's ears swiveled occasionally, tracking sounds beyond human perception, his body tense with an alertness that hadn't diminished since Mercer's appearance. The hearing had been postponed indefinitely following the disruption. Initial investigations had turned up nothing on Vincent Mercer. No military records, no government affiliations, not even a driver's license or social security number. It was as if he didn't exist at all, which only deepened Marcus's unease. The landline phone rang, startling both man and dog. Marcus wheeled himself over to answer it, his movements precise despite his fatigue. He hadn't slept more than a few hours at a stretch, not with the constant feeling of being watched. "Bennett," he answered tersely. "Sergeant, it's Judge Harlow." The older man's voice sounded strained. I need to speak with you immediately. Not over the phone. Marcus's grip tightened on the receiver. What's happened? There was a break-in at the courthouse last night. The only things taken were your case files, a pause, and the surveillance footage from the day of the hearing. A cold weight settled in Marcus's stomach. Where do you want to meet? The Arlington National Cemetery, in 1 hour. Section 60. Come alone. The judge hesitated. No, bring Ranger. After what I saw in that courtroom, I'd feel safer with him there. The line went dead. Marcus sat for a moment, processing. Section 60, where many of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan were buried, including members of his own unit. It wasn't a coincidence. 50 minutes later, Marcus navigated his wheelchair along the paved paths of Arlington, Ranger walking attentively at his side. The November air was crisp, the sky a clear, cold blue that contrasted with the solemnity of the white headstones stretching in perfect alignment across the rolling hills. As they approached Section 60, Ranger suddenly stopped, his head lifting as he scented the air. A low growl began in his chest. "What is it, boy?" Marcus whispered, scanning the area. The cemetery was quiet, only a few visitors paying respects at distant graves. He could see Judge Harlow waiting near a bench about 50 yards ahead, his tall figure unmistakable, even at a distance. Ranger's growl deepened, his gaze fixed not on the judge, but on a cluster of trees to their right. Marcus reached for the concealed sidearm he'd brought, a precaution that now seemed prescient. "Judge," he called out, his voice carrying across the pristine grounds. "Get down." Harlow turned, confusion crossing his face, but before he could react, a figure emerged from behind a large memorial stone near him. Even from this distance, Marcus recognized the platinum-haired woman from the courtroom. She moved with practiced efficiency, grabbing the judge's arm and pressing something against his side. Harlow went rigid, then slumped as she supported his weight, making it look to casual observers like she was helping an elderly man who had taken ill. Marcus began moving forward rapidly, but Ranger darted ahead, a blur of black and tan racing across the green space. At the same moment, Marcus heard a rustle from the trees to his right. He turned to see Vincent Mercer stepping out onto the path, looking as immaculate as he had in the courtroom, an expression of mild interest on his face. "I wouldn't," Mercer said calmly, nodding toward where the woman was now easing Judge Harlow into a wheelchair, very similar to Marcus's own. "He's merely sedated. For now." Marcus drew his weapon, aiming it steadily at Mercer. "Call your people off. Now." Mercer seemed unfazed by the gun. "You military types are so predictable, always reaching for a weapon when conversation would suffice." He sighed, shaking his head. "The judge isn't our target, Sergeant. He's leverage. Just as you are leverage for what we really want." Ranger had stopped halfway to the judge, caught between returning to protect Marcus and continuing his charge toward the platinum-haired woman. The dog's indecision was visible in his posture, his training warring with his protective instincts. "Ranger, come!" Marcus commanded, his voice sharp with urgency. The dog hesitated, then reluctantly returned to his side, though his body remained rigid with alertness, eyes never leaving the woman and the unconscious judge. "What do you want?" Marcus demanded, keeping his weapon trained on Mercer. "I told you in the courtroom," Mercer replied. "We want Ranger. Or more precisely, we want what was done to him." He took a step closer, seemingly unconcerned about the gun. "Did you never wonder why he's different from other military dogs? Why he can sense things no other dog can? Why he knows things before they happen?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "He's well trained. Special Forces dogs, please." Mercer interrupted, his tone almost patronizing. "We both know it's more than training. We both know it's more than training. 3 years ago, your unit found something in that cave system in Afghanistan. Something the military wanted kept quiet. And then, coincidentally, Ranger was taken for additional testing and came back. Enhanced. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The cave system, a network of tunnels they'd been sent to clear after intelligence, suggested it housed a Taliban command center. They'd found no insurgents, but they had discovered something unusual. A chamber with strange markings and equipment that none of them recognized. Ranger had been particularly agitated there, pawing at a section of wall that later turned out to be a hidden compartment containing what looked like ancient artifacts alongside modern technology. Everything had been classified immediately. Their unit was debriefed separately, sworn to secrecy, and within days, Ranger had been temporarily reassigned. "How do you know about that?" Marcus asked, his voice low. Mercer smiled thinly. "We have our sources. What matters is that your military tried to weaponize something they didn't understand. They experimented on Ranger using technology they found. Technology that enhanced his already impressive sensory capabilities, that connected him to frequencies and energies beyond normal perception. His eyes gleamed with an unsettling intensity. They created something extraordinary, but they have no idea how to control it or replicate it. We do." Behind Mercer, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up silently on the cemetery road. The platinum-haired woman was now wheeling Judge Harlow toward it, moving with purpose but not rushing, maintaining the illusion of normalcy to any distant observers. "Let the judge go," Marcus insisted, his finger tensing on the trigger. "That depends entirely on you," Mercer replied coolly. "Come with us, bring Ranger, and the judge walks away unharmed. Refuse, and—" He shrugged, leaving the threat unspoken but clear. Marcus felt trapped, options rapidly diminishing. He couldn't risk the judge's life, but surrendering Ranger to these people was unthinkable. More than that, he couldn't shake the feeling that Mercer wasn't telling the full truth. That whatever they wanted with Ranger was more dangerous than he was letting on. As if sensing his handler's turmoil, Ranger pressed closer to Marcus's side, a low whine escaping him. In that sound, Marcus heard not fear but determination. The same unwavering loyalty that had saved his life countless times before. In that moment of connection, something shifted. A plan formed in Marcus's mind. Dangerous, maybe even desperate, but their only chance. He remembered something from their training, a command rarely used, but one that Ranger would recognize instantly. "Fine," Marcus said, lowering his weapon slightly. "We'll come with you, but I need to get closer to my dog first." Mercer studied him, suspicious but intrigued. "Slowly," he cautioned. Marcus wheeled himself closer to Ranger, bending down as if to secure the dog's vest. His mouth near Ranger's ear, he whispered a single word. A command that had been part of their most classified training. Phantom. Ranger's posture changed instantly, his body becoming absolutely still for a fraction of a second before he exploded into action. But instead of attacking Mercer as might have been expected, the dog shot away in a different direction, moving with such speed that he was a blur against the green grass. Mercer's composure finally cracked. "Stop him!" he shouted, reaching inside his jacket. Marcus raised his weapon again. "I wouldn't," he warned, echoing Mercer's earlier words. At the SUV, chaos erupted. Ranger had reached the vehicle, not attacking the platinum-haired woman but circling the SUV with precision. Something clutched in his mouth that he'd retrieved from beneath Marcus's wheelchair. A small, cylindrical object that he placed beneath the vehicle before darting away. The woman shouted something, abandoning Judge Harlow's wheelchair and reaching for a weapon. But before she could fire, Ranger had already changed direction, racing back toward Marcus. "What have you done?" Mercer demanded, his earlier calm replaced with cold fury. Marcus allowed himself a tight smile. "You're not the only ones with technology." He pressed a button on his watch, and a sharp electronic pulse emanated from the device Ranger had planted. The SUV's lights flickered, then died, the vehicle suddenly disabled by the EMP device. A prototype Marcus had been given by a friend in military intelligence after he'd reported being followed. The moment of confusion was all they needed. Ranger reached Marcus's side, and without hesitation, Marcus commanded, "Barrier!" The dog positioned himself between Marcus and Mercer, his teeth bared in warning. From the distance came shouts as cemetery security, alerted by the commotion, began approaching. Mercer's face contorted with rage, but calculation quickly replaced emotion. He was outnumbered, his transportation disabled. Security approached. With a final cold look at Marcus, he backed away. "This isn't over, Sergeant," he called. "What's inside your dog? That technology, that potential, it's bigger than you know. And we will have it." He turned and began walking rapidly away, disappearing among the headstones as his associate abandoned the judge and fled in the opposite direction. Marcus immediately wheeled himself to Judge Harlow, Ranger following vigilantly. The judge was beginning to stir, the sedative apparently mild enough to wear off quickly. His eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition. "Bennett," he murmured groggily. "What happened?" "You're safe now," Marcus assured him, checking the judge's pulse. "But I think we need to have a very different conversation about Ranger's case." As security personnel arrived on the scene, Marcus placed his hand on Ranger's head, feeling the solid warmth beneath his palm. They had won this round. But Mercer's words echoed in his mind. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. Whatever had been done to Ranger, whatever technology had been used on him, was clearly more significant than he had realized. And now, keeping Ranger wasn't just about saving his partner. It was about protecting something that could be far more dangerous in the wrong hands. Resolution: 2 weeks after the confrontation at Arlington, Marcus sat in a secure conference room at the Pentagon, Ranger lying vigilantly at his feet. Across the polished table sat General Eleanor Hayes, the silver-haired director of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, and Dr. Adrian Chen, a neurobiologist whose clearance level exceeded even the generals present. The room was silent as the last slide of Dr. Chen's presentation faded from the screen. Detailed brain scans of Ranger compared to those of ordinary military working dogs, showing pronounced differences in the hippocampus and pineal gland. "So you're telling me," Marcus said carefully, breaking the heavy silence, "that the technology found in that cave system was used to, what? Enhance Ranger's existing abilities?" Dr. Chen nodded, his expression grave. The artifacts recovered contained properties we're still struggling to understand. A combination of ancient methodologies and advanced technology that defies conventional classification. What we do know is that when applied to canines, particularly those with already exceptional cognitive and sensory abilities, it created something unprecedented. General Hayes leaned forward, her steely gaze fixed on Mark. "What your dog experienced was part of a classified program called Project Sentinel. The goal was to develop enhanced canine units capable of detecting threats beyond conventional parameters. Not just explosives or narcotics, but electromagnetic anomalies, radiation signatures, even certain neurological patterns associated with hostile intent. And Ranger was one of these test subjects," Marcus stated flatly, trying to keep the anger from his voice. "The most successful one," Dr. Chen confirmed. "His neural architecture was exceptionally compatible with the technology. The results exceeded all expectations. He developed capabilities we hadn't even hypothesized. Precognitive awareness, sensory perception beyond normal ranges, an almost empathic connection to his handler." Marcus looked down at Ranger, remembering countless moments when the dog had anticipated dangers no one else could detect. How he always seemed to know when the nightmares were coming before Marcus himself felt them approaching. And those people at the courthouse, Mercer and his associates, they know about this program? General Hayes's expression darkened. Vincent Mercer is the operational alias for Dr. Victor Mayhew, former DARPA scientist who worked on the initial phases of Project Sentinel before being dismissed for ethical violations. He was attempting to push the research in directions we considered problematic. What directions? Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew. Human applications, Dr. Chen said quietly. Mayhew believed the technology could be adapted for use in human subjects, creating enhanced soldiers with capabilities similar to what we've seen in Ranger, but magnified through human cognitive function. The potential risks were deemed unacceptable, so Mayhew went private, Marcus concluded. And now he wants Ranger to continue his research. Not just Ranger, General Hayes corrected. He wants you as well. The bond between you and Ranger is unique, stronger than any other handler canine pair in the program. Mayhew's research suggested that this connection was key to stabilizing and maximizing the enhancements. Marcus absorbed this information, his hand instinctively moving to rest on Ranger's head. The dog looked up at him, amber eyes alert and trusting despite everything that had been done to him. Whatever had been changed in Ranger, whatever abilities had been enhanced, the core of who he was remained unchanged. Loyal, protective, and intrinsically bonded to Marcus. So what happens now? Marcus finally asked. The custody hearing is still pending. The Army still officially wants to reassign him. General Hayes exchanged a glance with Dr. Chen before responding. In light of recent events, the official position has changed. We believe separating you and Ranger would be not only inhumane, but potentially dangerous. The bond between you appears to stabilize the enhancements. Without it, she left the sentence unfinished. Ranger stays with me, Marcus stated firmly. Not a question, but a demand. Yes, Hayes confirmed. But there are conditions. You'll both need protection. Mayhew won't give up easily. And we'll need your cooperation with ongoing monitoring and occasional testing. Strictly non-invasive, she added, seeing Marcus's expression harden. What was done to Ranger represents both an extraordinary breakthrough and a potential risk. We need to understand it better. Marcus considered these terms, studying Ranger's calm, attentive face. After everything they'd been through together, the battlefields of Afghanistan, the long recovery after the explosion, the adjustment to civilian life, this was yet another challenge they would face as a team. We'll cooperate, he agreed finally, on one condition. Full transparency from now on. No more secrets about what was done to him, what he's capable of, or what you're looking for. Ranger has given enough to this country without being treated like a lab experiment. General Hayes hesitated, then nodded curtly. Agreed. Starting tomorrow, you'll be relocated to a secure facility where... No, Marcus interrupted. We stay in our home. You can add security, install whatever monitoring equipment you need, but Ranger deserves normalcy. His voice softened as he looked down at his partner. We both do. After a tense moment, Hayes nodded again. Very well. We'll make the arrangements. She stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Sergeant Bennett, what you and Ranger have, it's remarkable. Not just the enhancements, but the bond itself. In many ways, that's the true breakthrough here. As Marcus wheeled himself from the room, Ranger padding faithfully beside him, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Anger at what had been done without his knowledge, fear of what Mayhew might still attempt, but mostly an overwhelming sense of attempt. Relief. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Outside the Pentagon, autumn leaves swirled in the crisp November air. Ranger paused, lifting his nose to the wind, scenting something beyond human perception. But instead of tensing as he had in the courtroom and cemetery, he relaxed, pressing closer to Marcus's wheelchair. "No danger. Not now," Marcus smiled, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "Let's go home, boy." As they moved toward the waiting vehicle, Marcus reflected on how much had changed in the past few weeks. The battle for Ranger's custody had transformed into something much larger, more complex. But the core truth remained simple. They belonged together, not because of military protocols or experimental technology, but because of something much more fundamental, the unbreakable bond between them. Whatever Ranger had become, whatever abilities the experiments had awakened in him, he was still the same loyal companion who had pulled Marcus from the burning wreckage in Afghanistan, who woke him from nightmares, who gave him purpose when he'd lost everything else. And that was worth fighting for, no matter what came next. Message reflection: the story of Marcus and Ranger transcends the extraordinary circumstances that brought them into the spotlight. At its heart, it illuminates fundamental truths about loyalty, trust, and the profound connections that can form between species, despite the absence of shared language or experience. Their bond reminds us that true companionship exists beyond words, in a realm of understanding that doesn't require verbal communication. Ranger's unwavering dedication to Marcus, his willingness to risk himself for his handler, to remain vigilant even in moments of apparent safety, speaks to something primordial in the relationship between humans and dogs. This connection, forged over thousands of years of coevolution, represents one of humanity's oldest partnerships. Yet their story also challenges us to reconsider what we owe the animals who serve alongside us. Military working dogs like Ranger are deployed into dangerous situations, exposed to trauma, and sometimes subjected to experiments that they cannot consent to or understand. Their loyalty is repaid, too often, with classification as equipment rather than as living beings deserving of care and consideration. The enhancements made to Ranger without Marcus's knowledge raise profound ethical questions about our responsibilities toward the animals under our stewardship. When we modify another living creature for our purposes, even with benevolent intentions like national security, we assume a deepened obligation to ensure their welfare and dignity. The attempt to separate Ranger from Marcus represented not just a personal injustice to both, but a systemic failure to recognize the moral responsibilities created by such interventions. Perhaps this is why Marcus fought so fiercely for Ranger beyond their personal bond. He understood intuitively what the military bureaucracy failed to grasp: that when we ask animals to serve, to protect, to sacrifice, we enter into an unspoken covenant with them. We promise, without words, but through our actions, that we will honor their service by treating them not as tools, but as partners. In our own lives, we may not face the dramatic circumstances that Marcus and Ranger encountered, but we do make choices daily about how we treat the animals in our care and in our society. Do we recognize their inherent worth, their capacity for emotion, their right to dignity? Or do we see them merely as means to our ends, valuable only for what they can provide us? The mysterious abilities that Ranger developed serve as a reminder of how much remains unknown about animal consciousness. Science continues to discover surprising cognitive and emotional capabilities in dogs and other animals, suggesting that the gap between human and animal experience may be narrower than we once believed. This should humble us, making us more cautious about assumptions regarding what animals understand, feel, or deserve. For Marcus, Ranger was never just a dog or a military asset. He was family, a being who had seen him at his most vulnerable and remained steadfast. Their relationship embodied what philosopher Martin Buber might have called an I-thou rather than an I-it connection. Marcus saw Ranger not as an object to be used, but as a subject with his own reality and worth. Even when he discovered that Ranger had been experimentally enhanced, his primary concern remained the dog's well-being and autonomy, not the advantages those enhancements might provide. In this lies perhaps the most important lesson of their story, that true connection, whether between humans or across species, requires us to recognize the other as inherently valuable, not merely useful. It asks us to protect those who trust us, to honor the silent sacrifices made by those who cannot speak for themselves, and to fight systems that would reduce living beings to mere resources. As we reflect on Marcus and Ranger's journey, we might consider the animals in our own lives and communities. Do we see them clearly, as beings with their own experiences and needs? Do we honor the trust they place in us? And when systems or institutions fail to recognize their worth, do we have the courage to stand, as Marcus did, and insist on their right to dignity and care? In a world increasingly defined by technology and utility, by what can be measured and monetized, the bond between a man and his dog reminds us of values that transcend calculation: loyalty, courage, and a love that asks for nothing beyond presence and companionship. These are the things that make us truly human. Even as they connect us to the animal world we too often forget we belong to. Audience interaction and call to action as we close the chapter on Marcus and Ranger's story. I can't help but wonder about the special bonds that exist between humans and their animal companions in your own lives. Their tale of loyalty, extraordinary perception, and unwavering dedication reminds us of the profound connections that can form between species. Have you ever experienced a moment when your dog seemed to know what you needed before you did? Perhaps they comforted you during a difficult time without being prompted, or they alerted you to something you couldn't perceive yourself. These moments of connection, when an animal companion sees us with a clarity that sometimes exceeds human understanding, can be truly transformative. Some say that animals, especially dogs, can sense things beyond our human perception, changes in our biochemistry that signal illness, subtle shifts in our emotional state, or even dangers we haven't yet registered. While Ranger's abilities were enhanced through extraordinary means, many of us have witnessed seemingly supernatural awareness in our own pets. If you've shared your life with a special animal companion, I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. How has your pet changed your life? What moments of connection have meant the most to you? Your experiences matter, and sharing them helps build a community that understands the profound importance of the human-animal bond. Beyond just sharing stories, consider how you might honor the service animals in your community. Military working dogs, service dogs, therapy animals, and search and rescue teams all represent the pinnacle of this ancient partnership between humans and dogs. Supporting organizations that train service animals, that care for retired military dogs, or that match veterans with companion animals, are wonderful ways to honor bonds like the one between Marcus and Ranger. Thank you for joining me for this story of courage, connection, and unconditional loyalty. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing to the channel for more tales that celebrate the extraordinary relationship between humans and their animal companions. Until next time, remember that some of life's most important lessons come to us not through words, but through the silent understanding of a faithful friend.